There are some public absurdities so large, so gaudily illuminated, and so perfectly adapted to the attention economy that they tempt the observer into laziness. One sees the thing, laughs, groans, or denounces, and imagines the work complete. The latest specimen is of this sort. A president posts an AI-generated image of himself in a form so thick with Christian iconography that only a publicist, a hostage, or a man who has never once entered a church except to be seen doing so could describe it as incidental. The president as Christ image is then deleted, and a defense is offered that it was meant merely to depict him as a doctor making people better. Yet the symbols remain unmistakable, and the outrage multiplies. The reinterpretations arrive on schedule, and by evening the nation is once again divided into those who call it blasphemy, those who call it trolling, and those who call it genius, because they have unfortunately trained themselves to confuse strategic indecency with depth. We are reminded, over and over, that the president does not use a media team, he speaks directly to the people. And so, we are perversely assured that the image was not a mistake, but a reflection of what he truly believes. It would be pleasant to treat this as a vulgar one-off, another attention-drunk stunt in a political age that rewards sacrilege when done with enough confidence. But that would give the episode too little credit. This was not simply tasteless. Tastelessness is often random. This was structural. It was the visible crest of a process long underway, the slow conversion of political leadership from a practical office into a symbolic vessel, then into a moral tribunal, and at last into something not content merely to command obedience, but eager to borrow the posture of salvation. The image itself tells the story, if one is willing to read pictures as one once read omens. It did not merely suggest strength, confidence, health, or victory, which are the ordinary vanities of rulers. It reached for the visual grammar of sanctity, centrality, glow, healing presence, reverent composition, the old fresco trick by which the viewer is not invited merely to approve the subject, but to orient himself around him. This is why the defense that he was just playing doctor failed so badly. A stethoscope can be misunderstood. A halo generally cannot. Yet the more instructive question is not why the image offended. That part is simple enough. The more serious questions are why this form, why now, and why in precisely this register. To answer that, one must walk backward through the machinery of delusion. Immediately before releasing the image came a confrontation, not merely with political criticism, but with a rival claimant to moral authority, the Pope. That matters. A president may withstand being called mistaken, foolish, reckless, or cruel by his opponents. These are ordinary political hazards, and indeed often useful ones. But when a figure speaking from an institution older than the Republic itself condemns the moral architecture of one's war rhetoric, when he says, in effect, that violence is being wrapped in Christian language and passed off as righteousness, the injury is of another kind. It does not simply dispute policy. It challenges the right of the political figure to define the good. Now a modest statesman, if such museum pieces still existed in circulation, might answer such a rebuke by arguing particulars. He might defend the policy, distinguish the facts, or accept the inconvenience of operating beneath a moral law that he does not personally own. But the stronger temptation in a system already accustomed to grandiosity is quite different. Not to answer moral criticism, but to out-symbolize it. When the shepherd from the hill declares the vineyard diseased, the modern sovereign does not inspect the vines. He commissions a portrait in which he appears as springtime itself. This is the first great corruption. Political conflict is no longer allowed to remain political. It is immediately elevated into moral theatre. A disagreement about war becomes a disagreement about moral truth. A disagreement about righteousness becomes a disagreement about who is entitled to speak in the name of God. And because naked authority is brittle, the system reaches for stronger adhesives, sacred language, providential framing, chosen nation rhetoric, civilizational destiny, healing metaphors, light versus darkness. In short, it begins raiding the sanctuary for props. That process did not begin with this image. The image is merely what happens when the costume department grows confident. Long before a leader depicts himself as the Redeemer, His supporters have grown accustomed to treating him as a figure exempt from ordinary judgment. He is not merely correct, but uniquely correct. Not merely embattled, but persecuted. Not merely effective, but anointed by history, necessity, or fate. Every movement surrounding such a figure insists at first that these are only metaphors. They are just ways of speaking. He fights for us. He alone says what others fear. He takes the arrows. He bears the burden. Observe how quickly politics begins to steal from liturgy. A candidate becomes a vessel, then a defender, then a martyr, then the indispensable center without whom the whole people would fall into darkness, inflation, atheism, chaos, drag brunch, or whatever the current plague may be. This is the old trick by which democracies quietly manufacture substitute monarchies while continuing to hold elections for decorative effect. And yet even this would not be enough without the second ingredient, a public train to complete unfinished symbols. The successful cult of leadership does not require every follower to be credulous. It requires only that enough of them become interpretively loyal. That is to say, they learn to treat meaning not as something to be discovered, but as something to be defended on behalf of the leader. So when the leader speaks crudely, they discover hidden strategy. When he contradicts himself, they discover nuance. When he insults, they discover authenticity. When he flatters violence, they discover realism. And when he posts a self-glorifying image in holy style, they discover, within minutes and with admirable industry, that it is not blasphemy at all, but healing symbolism, or parody, or media bait, or a commentary on restoration, or perhaps simply a misunderstanding by people insufficiently fluent in the modern language of memes. Thus the system preserves itself not by eliminating contradiction, but by training 1,000 small apologists to convert contradiction into proof of sophistication. A saner age would have called this rationalization. Ours calls it engagement. The controversy, then, does not rest on the image alone. It rests on the whole prior education of the audience. They've been taught for years to accept a fusion of roles that older societies, for all their barbarisms, at least had the decency to keep somewhat distinct. The ruler governs, the priest blesses, the prophet rebukes. But a political movement drifting toward cult just cannot tolerate these separations. It wants the ruler to govern as priest, and to survive rebuke by becoming prophet against the prophets. Hence the peculiar shape of the present conflict. The Pope criticizes the use of Christian language to sanctify war. The President attacks the Pope as weak and foolish. Then, under the pressure of this moral contradiction, there appears an image in which the President is represented as healer, center, and luminous source. One need not be an especially talented exegete to understand the move. It says, in effect, the authority judging me is not above me. The meaning you seek is here. Not, I have done right, but I stand where right is seen. This is why the symbolism matters so much more than the subsequent denial. The denial is simply the receipt tucked into the bag after the theft. It exists to preserve maneuverability. Modern propaganda prefers signs that can operate on two levels at once. One audience sees overt sacralization and feels affirmed. Another is told the sacred reading is hysterical. The image thus performs the very clever feat of being both unmistakable and disavowed, blasphemous and deniable, ridiculous and useful. In older centuries, a king had to commission an altar. Now he need only post a file and let everyone else perform the exegesis for free. Technology has improved the trade enormously. AI image generation is the perfect instrument for symbolic overreach because it combines three qualities especially beloved by degraded political culture: speed, ambiguity, and shareability. One no longer needs doctrine, only aesthetics. One no longer needs a coherent argument for exceptional status, only a visual test balloon. The machine can manufacture borrowed grandeur in seconds. Sacred symbolism, once slow-cooked by centuries of art, can now be reheated in the microwave and served as content. And yet, because the medium is unserious, its defenders imagine the act itself immune from serious interpretation. It's just an image. says the same class of people who, let's be honest, understand perfectly well that flags matter, photographs matter, memorials matter, kneeling matters, burning matters, uniforms matter, stages matter, cathedrals matter, camera angles matter, and, well, every other arrangement of symbols matters whenever it flatters their own preferred myth. Only when the symbolism turns indecent do they suddenly discover the doctrine that images mean nothing. But the deeper obscenity is not that the sacred has been mocked. Politics has always mocked what it cannot inherit honestly. The deeper obscenity is that the sacred has been imitated without substance, which is far more dangerous. For what is being reproduced here is not Christianity, but its architecture emptied and repurposed. One finds the forms everywhere, with the contents removed. There is a chosen people, but now they are a voting bloc. There is persecution, but now it means criticism. There is witness, but now it means posting. There is martyrdom, but now it means indictment or just bad press. There is gospel, but now it is branding. There is heresy, but now it is disloyalty to the man. There is redemption, but now it is national restoration under one indispensable figure. There is resurrection, but now it is poll recovery after scandal. The old symbols are retained because symbols are efficient. They allow power to clothe appetite in meaning. But the substance, the discipline, humility, sacrifice, self-limitation, answerability to truths not of one's own making, that part is less portable and has therefore been left behind. This is why the image feels less like a joke than a culmination. The road to it was paved in stages. First, ordinary politics became a drama of existential rescue. Then rescue required a heroic singular leader. Then criticism of the leader became criticism of the people themselves. Then moral language was conscripted to defend policy. Then institutions that once stood above rulers were cast as partisan obstacles. Then every contradiction had to be metabolized, every excess rationalized, every symbol bent toward preserving infallibility. And finally, when confronted by an older moral voice speaking in the language the movement had already appropriated, the system reached for the shortest available route to legitimacy. It placed the leader inside the icon. That is the real controversy. Not that one man posted one offensive image, but that a whole political ecosystem had evolved to the point where such an image was the natural next move. And the public, as usual, performs its assigned role brilliantly. Some denounce the picture as sacrilege. Some laugh it off. Some defend it. Some pass intent. Some insist it is all media manipulation. Some say the critics are overreacting. Some say the supporters are in a cult. All of which may be true in pieces, and none of which yet touches the central fact. The system thrives on contradiction. Every reaction becomes energy. Every argument keeps the sign alive. The golden calf no longer needs unanimous worship. It requires only continual attention. In a networked age, outrage is merely incense with better analytics. A country becomes cultic then, not when everyone kneels, but when more and more of public life is organized around preserving the symbolic immunity of one figure. When law, morality, identity, grievance, and hope are steadily drawn inward and made to circulate through the same body. When external standards are not answered but absorbed. When every challenge is treated as confirmation. When the people cease asking whether the sign is true, and ask only whether they are permitted to say what it obviously resembles. By that stage, idol is no longer a melodramatic insult, it is a technical description. An idol is not merely a false god, it is a human construction to which human beings surrender the judgment that should have remained free. It is a thing made by many hands, then treated as if it had made them. It is a sign that feeds on the devotion, fear, and argument of the community until the community forgets it was ever assembled. And this is where the biblical symbolism proves useful, not as decoration, but as diagnosis. The warning in those stories was never only against primitive superstition, as if the danger were confined to men bowing before livestock metallurgy. The warning was against the perennial human temptation to close the gap between power and holiness, to make visible and manageable that which should judge us rather than serve us, to enthrone a work of our own appetite, and then call it providence. That is the satire of the present age. Having congratulated ourselves for outgrowing kings by divine right, we have set about manufacturing them by algorithm. The current scandal, then, deserves ridicule, but not the lazy sort. It deserves the ridicule one reserves for a civilization that has learned to imitate revelation with software, martyrdom with public relations, and transcendence with brand management. The problem is not that the performance was clumsy, though it was. The problem is that the performance was intelligible, because the stage had already been built. And once a nation has trained itself to accept leaders not merely as rulers, but as living screens onto which judgment, hope, grievance, and sacred significance may all be projected at once, it should not flatter itself that it is merely passing through yet another political cycle. It is undertaking temple work. The final indignity is that such systems always call themselves restorations. They never say, "We are building an idol." They say, "We are healing the nation." They say, "We are taking back what is ours." They say, "We are defending faith." They say, "We are making things whole." And because these phrases borrow the emotional authority of older moral traditions, many decent people walk into the arrangement believing they are defending order, when in fact, they are feeding a machine that steadily concentrates meaning into one human symbol, and then punishes all who refuse the concentration. So let no one say this was only an image. It was a summary. A president under moral rebuke did not merely answer his critic. He reached for a sanctified self-depiction. His defenders did not merely clarify. They performed the now routine labor of interpretive rescue. His opponents did not merely condemn, they helped circulate the sign into ubiquity. The religious symbolism was not accidental. The deniability was not accidental. The timing was not accidental. The form was not accidental. The only accidental thing is that anyone still finds the process surprising. For when a people has spent years replacing judgment with loyalty, loyalty with meaning, and meaning with image, it should not be startled to wake and find that its politics has begun speaking in icons. This is not the beginning of the story. This is what the story has been building toward all along.